It's hard, just like thinking, but it's not as hard as doing neither, because then you're a mess. You're anxious and you're without purpose and goal, and you're inarticulate and you're weak. You lose. And I don't mean in a you win and someone else loses manner. I mean in an everyone loses manner. And so when you sit down to write or think, you have to be motivated. And if you're not doing it right. And writing teachers should stress that above all else. They should help their students identify something that they can hardly wait to write about because it's so important to them. Well, then you've got the motivation, and each word starts to matter because your life depends on it. And if you think your life doesn't depend on your words, you just don't know anything about words. And so it is definitely the case. Let's take a business example. If you're constantly being forced to write things that grate against your conscience, or that you find yourself bored to death by, then it's either time to stand up and say something, and then you should use the writing program to figure out what you're going to stand up and say, or it's time to get a new job, in which case you should use the writing program to put your CV and your resume together and maybe write yourself something like a statement of purpose. Like, this is no game. If writing is thinking, which it is, and thinking sets your life in order or not, then you don't let people mess with your words. You want to get them in order like soldiers. And that's partly what this writing program is designed to help people do. Now, it's not so much we're trying to teach people to write. We're trying to facilitate their thought and their clarity of communication. And writing, this is another thing that isn't taught well to students. Well, why should I learn to write? Well, how else are you going to communicate with people as you ascend up a hierarchy of competence? Like some of the toughest guys I know, Jocko Willink, for example, lays tremendous stress on literacy. Even as a soldier, he had to communicate orders, let's say, to the people that he was in command of, but he also had to communicate up the chain of command. And if your words are well structured and inspired and properly motivated and aimed like an arrow, you're unstoppable. And I don't understand, so many people are taught to write by people who don't know how to write or why to write or how to think. And that's partly what we're trying to address here. So we hope people will find it extremely useful.
It's also like knowing how to write a good email too. Even if you're not interested in essays specifically, knowing how to write a good email can change how a company is run.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it can change people's lives, right? You need to write an email to someone you want to get a job from, or a landlord to try to get them to not increase your rent, or
or a city councilman to try to get them to do something that needs doing in your neighborhood, or a politician to get them to change a law. You're going to be making your case in front of people, badly or well, your entire life.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why we don't teach people that this arms them. Well, we won't use that language, right? Because we think everyone should be cooperative. And it's a complete bloody mess. But we did decide, though, we've been trying to crack the problem of scaling education. And we have a bunch of ideas about that. And Julian and I were working on a broader online university project when I got extremely ill, and it folded back into this writing program, which turned out in some ways to be an okay thing, because this is actually, hopefully it will address a very serious issue.
And we could do it instead of the other one, which...
the other one was pretty broad.
It was,
Too broad.
Yeah,
better break
which is why it failed, probably.
Well, part of the reason. It hasn't failed yet. It's just been sequenced differently.
Yeah, fair enough.
So Peterson Academy is coming.
Yes, and we have online courses, and we're working with people in the broader educational sphere, so who knows what will happen. You should talk about the design a little bit, because it's quite elegant.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we spent a ton of time building the design out. I mean, we did a number of iterations at the beginning that were very, very different. My wife's a product designer, and I'm a front-end developer, and so we're both very concerned with UX and making things that people can use naturally and that feel good to use. And so, a lot of people don't like to write, and that's an issue, right? Is if we want people to write and we want people to learn to write better and think better, then when you go into a new application that you have to learn, it has to be very comfortable. And so we wanted to make the design very modern, very clean, very intuitive.
Yeah, self-explanatory, right? Because a hallmark of good design is that you don't have to refer to a manual to figure out how to use, let's say, the tools. And
Well, and these are different things, right? We're trying to teach people to interact with a word processor differently, which is a big ask in a way to the user, right? And because almost everyone writes using something, right? People use Word or Google Docs or whatever,
right, so
whatever they
we
use.
have to make it easier for them to write using this, at least easier.
Well, the payoff has to be there.
Well, that's
Right,
the payoff also has to be there.
Because
But
there's a
ease
bit
of
more
use
work.
really
It's not
matters.
just a blank sheet.
Right.
There's more work.
You
to
actually
it,
do have
but
to
it
learn to
helps
use
you.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But theoretically and from our experience, the tools are worth the learning curve, and we've tried to make the learning curve as minimal as possible using good design.
Well, right. The other thing we did, and this is a design element too, is that while you're learning to use the tools, you're also learning how to go about thinking at the same time. So you're not only learning how to use the writing program, you're learning how to think about thinking. And that's extremely important. Just knowing, for example, that you do multi-level processing and that you can edit and reconceptualize at all those levels. That's extremely useful formally to know about how you think and why you think.
Yeah, what's a nice thing about the tools in general is that they're not specific tools to the app, right? Like you can use them in context of the app, but if you're writing an email in Gmail or whatever, then you can still go through it and improve the sentences and improve the structure of the paragraphs, and you can use the tools that you've built and practiced using the application.
Now internalize.
Yeah, exactly. And you can use them wherever, and you can use them, when you're thinking or talking as well, in a sort of faster way. But they're generally useful things to understand and
right. So my impression going through, I kind of had to learn to use this app in the last few months, because although I was involved in the design to begin with, when I got sick, I forgot a lot of what the app did and why it was produced the way it was, and so I've had to relearn it. Learn how to use it over the last couple of months, and it was very straightforward to learn. But what I was even happier about was the fact that learning to use it does not waste effort. If you learn a program like Photoshop, you can use Photoshop, the Photoshop skills you've learned on Illustrator and other Adobe products, but it doesn't really generalize outside of that domain because these commands are so specific. With this, you could use Essay for a year and then hypothetically never use it again, because you could do what
Don't tell
it does in a
people
word
that.
processor.
He does this only by the personality test once. Essay, never use it again. Learn
you're not
it,
gonna need it.
internalize it, throw it away.
No, I wouldn't recommend that, because I think that once you use it,
this guy's not in our marketing team.
Yeah. You'll also find it a good place to keep track of your essays and all of that, to build an essay bank. And we're going to build.
Oh, that's cool. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So we thought about the problem of what do you do with what you've written, and that's also relevant to something mentioned earlier. If you write an essay and your first draft is twice as long as it needs to be, and you cut a bunch of it out, keep what you've cut in another document, because I've almost never written anything that was wasted. It might not have been useful precisely in the context that I wanted it for at that moment, but keeping a log or a collection of written material, especially by topic, is extremely useful as you progress through your life, and you'll find a use for it, man.
Okay.
It's useful for writers. It's also, I play music, and I've done that with songs too, right? You can write song lyrics and just write poetry or whatever you're writing, and then you can, that's how a lot of great songs have been written. Little pieces here and there of different, thrown away songs that people stitch together. The Beatles did it all the time. But so it's not just for writing, but for artistic
it's been my
things as well.
experience that
Often.
no genuine work is wasted. It just doesn't fit necessarily with exactly what you're doing at the moment. But first of all, the skills you learn while you're genuinely working generalize, and also the products, if you keep them. I had some poems I wrote, horrible poems about children, 15 years ago.
We don't need context for that. That's okay.
They're funny. So they're funny. Yeah, it was when I was doing my clinical work, and I needed to blow off some steam about all the awful things I was seeing. So thank you very much. In any case, I wrote those 15 years ago. It wasn't till this year that we started working on having them illustrated, and a whole sequence of creative projects emerged from that. So you have to realize that when you're writing, you are literally changing your brain.